Babe, wake up, the brand new Ghost of Tsushima sequel trailer just dropped, and it actually looks really good. This, ladies and gents, is Ghost of Yōtei, and it's the next big entry in the series launching 2025. Yes, Sucker Punch is turning it into a full-blown anthology. There's a huge time skip, a new protagonist, the game's been built from the ground up for the PS5, and there's so much more to talk about in this video. The state of play already showed some gameplay, but we've got more details from a bunch of interviews with the game's developers. Now, I'm not going to lie, Sucker Punch not continuing the story with Jin Sakai was not on my bingo card. Like, some of the stuff they set up with the end of the game and the DLC genuinely seemed like it was building towards something big. Instead, Sucker Punch decided on a new protagonist, a female samurai who goes by the name of Atsu. Fun fact, her voice actress is Erika Ishii. She had a ton of roles for games like Destiny 2, Apex Legends, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, and also Cyberpunk 2077, among an extensive list of other characters. So she was the voice of Ruth Zeng. If you remember her from Phantom Liberty expansion, there was one scene with her during one of the missions. So in Ghost of Yōtei, Atsu's journey takes place in 1603, more than 300 years after the events of Ghost of Tsushima during the Edo period. Besides a huge time skip, the action takes place in a completely different geographical area of Japan in the lands surrounding Mount Yōtei, a tower peak in the heart of Ezo, an area known today as Hokkaido. Situated in the northern part of Japan, in the time period we get to play in, this whole island was outside of Japan's rule, and there are many unexpected dangers. So it's likely that the game will explore more of the governance by the Matsumai clan over the southern part of the region, their initial relations and trade with the Ainu, the indigenous people who lived in the area. In fact, a lot of people speculate that Atsu is actually of Ainu descent, and possibly the Ainu rebellion, though historically I believe that came in a lot later from when the game setting is in, so like half a century later from when we get to play in, though there could be a time skip in the full game. And while that's not indicative of the game's size, Hokkaido is a much larger area than Tsushima ever was, over 100 times bigger in fact. In the trailer we get to see sprawling grasslands, massive open areas, the huge Yōtei mountain in the background which looks absolutely amazing, but there's also snowy tundras and many other environments. Like, it's a very vibrant island and a very awesome looking place, which makes sense. I mean, this was always the case with Tsushima 2, going over the colors and obviously the beautiful environments and the scenic routes. It's going to be an even bigger visual spectacle because Sucker Punch actually built the game from the ground up for the PlayStation 5, making the world feel even more real than before. More believable wind movement on grass and vegetation, there's massive sightliness when looking across the environment, whole new skies featuring stars and auroras, and I believe at some point we even see an aurora borealis. And I mean, the game in general just looks overall insanely good. We even have way more creatures roaming the fields than ever before. Like, we have this scene over here with Atsu on the horseback, and of course a huge, like, I'm not even sure how you call a big pack of horses in English, so let me know down below in the comments. But this is some of the highest amount of creatures at any given time I've seen in a Ghost of Tsushima game, which of course we only had one prior to this. But now that the time skip is pretty much in full effect, this also gives us a chance to master a completely new set of weapons, tools, as well as powers, a lot of which are actually appropriate to the time period. So besides melee weapons like the katana, Atsu can also use firearms. We in fact have a very small teaser of her aiming down what looks like a matchlock type firearm. So think of this as an early version of the musket. So fun fact, matchlocks were introduced in Japan by the Portuguese during the 16th century and then continued to be heavily used during the Edo period in which the game is set. And this is going to add such a completely new dynamic to the combat. Of course, we did have ranged combat before via the bow and arrow, but I am curious if we're going to get a full-on skill tree that kind of experiments a bit more with the musket. I'm not sure if we're going to get any slowdown time for it or any other crazy ways to replenish ammo via headshots like we can with some of the builds in Ghost of Tsushima, but I mean, this adds a whole new dynamic to the way we see ranged combat. I would expect this to be some kind of ultimate maybe, or some, like, you know, few shots to take down enemies instantly, because it genuinely seems overpowered considering the type of armor that, yeah, enemies could have in the time period. Now, interesting is that Atsu also uses double katanas in some of these brief shots right here. Now, that was a very uncommon fighting style for a samurai even back then, except one important historical figure, which is none other than Miyamoto Masashi. Considered the original inventor of the two swords fighting style, he actually lived from 1584 to 1645, so he actually fits for the game's time period, meaning that there's a high chance we're going to see a 19-20-year-old Masashi actually training Atsu in one way or another. At least that's my expectation, which might also explain how she gets to use the double katana wielding, meaning that we're going to likely see a mythical tail technique related to this whole thing. And mythical tails in Tsushima were some of the coolest ways to unlock amazing and absolutely OP powers, like the Heavenly Strike, the Dance of Wrath, and the Undying Flame. And speaking of the Undying Flame, it looks like it might make a comeback, but in a totally badass way, that we get to set the sword on fire, which might or might not also be a fire hazard for the back of our heads, but I mean, it looks totally cool, and it's like one of the best abilities in Tsushima, so might as well just be in Yōtei. And finally, we saw her also wielding the kusarigama, the sickle and weight chain. So this light and compact weapon, it was quite common during the Edo period, and it can be the perfect counter against swordsmen, providing a way to entangle an opponent's weapon or even immobilize their arms and legs, allowing the wielder to rush forward and strike with the sickle. Plus, of course, the fact that we still get to use, or well, dual hand one single katana. We see some of the shots right here, including one that appears to start duels. So I think that's a partial confirmation that duels are making a return. One-on-one duels were some of my favorite fighting moments in Tsushima, so I'm definitely glad that this is going to be the case. Now, I know that some of you may find it a bit disappointing that we don't get to see more of Jin Sakai or a continuation of the Mongol invasion, but I'm pretty sure that they kind of wrapped all of the things that needed to be wrapped back in Tsushima, and of course with the Iki Island DLC, and instead it seems that Sucker Punch is shifting focus on the idea of the ghost itself rather than any given character. At Sucker Punch, we wanted to explore what it could mean to have a new hero wearing a ghost mask and uncovering a new legend. So it kind of sounds like they're trying to build an anthology, maybe even a response to, like, yeah, Assassin's Creed franchise, which has been pretty big on that and finally moved to Japan after, yeah, so many years. But in a different interview for the New York Times with the game's creative directors, Nate Fox and Jason Connell, it was mentioned that this is a tightly choreographed effort by Sony to transform the series into a larger entertainment franchise. So not just like sequels and different settings in feudal Japan, but there's also like other types of media, and there were already rumors about a cinematic version of the original game being in development for several years now under the same director behind the John Wick films. And I mean, I can see why Sony is pushing for this. Games turning into movies or Netflix series have seen quite the critical and commercial success in the past few years, like the Uncharted movie, or more recently the Super Mario Bros. Movie, and I would also add Cyberpunk Edgerunners anime to that list, which also massively increased the player count for Cyberpunk back in 2022. That plus Sony might have realized they have an advantage on quality and polish to a game that's been competing since day one with another absolutely massive franchise, which is Ubisoft's Assassin's Creed, which also finally moved to feudal Japan via Assassin's Creed Shadows. So it comes at no shock that they want to set up an anthology, follow the idea, the legend of the ghost samurai through different periods and areas of Japan instead of just one particular character and their story, giving them a lot of room to develop a long-lasting series. And personally, I'm all up for that. I do think that Sucker Punch kind of found a sweet spot of open world game design and like just samurai gameplay. It's definitely one of the best ways to experience that culture, also that fighting style, and kind of see more of it. I think that we still have a lot of room for samurai games to be amazing even after 2025. Now, I can't remember which character it was back in Tsushima that kinda gave us a hint where the game might have moved next, because one of the characters was leaving for mainland Japan, and it really seemed as if Jin would follow at some point in her footsteps, but it was not the case. We had then the Iki Island DLC, and it moved in a completely different direction. Now, the time period was also marked by economic growth, as well as a big flourishing of the arts. Culture thrived as well as theater. So it's no surprise that the character features this musical instrument on the back. It is called a shamisen, and it's basically a 3-string sort of instrument used to play music. Now, in Ghost of Tsushima, we also had the flute, which had an effect on changing the weather, though the sequel may expand upon it a little bit. But as we are on the subject of culture and also the story, we do have to mention that Sucker Punch does want to bring more agency in terms of the outcomes we can create from the main narrative. And they said in the same interview that players would have greater control over the story than in the previous game. Now, of course, Ghost of Tsushima was pretty notorious for having a very linear story. You had absolutely no control over it, and even when you did, it was like very minimal and it did not affect anything. So yeah, I'm glad to see that they actually go in this direction of giving us more control over it. And maybe, who knows, we might have branching narratives, though that is still just speculation. But as of now, I am super excited for the game. It also launches 2025. It seems to be a good time, a good year to actually enjoy a lot of big games. So State of Play is done. We have seen some pretty big things in it, but for the time being, this is everything with Ghost of Tsushima 2, aka Ghost of Yōtei. Let me know down below what you think. In the meantime, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.